We tend to think of society as this single, solid thing. But what if it's actually more like a really complex machine? With all these interlocking gears and circuits that have to work perfectly to keep things running? Well, in this explainer, we're going to pop the hood and look at 4 specific mechanisms, straight from our source material, that can cause this whole machine to start breaking down.
So, what's the glue? What are the invisible forces that actually hold everything together? It's definitely not just about laws or governments. It's this really delicate balance of shared values, trust, and these social structures we all kind of agree on. Before we can really dig into how things fall apart, we have to have a sense of what keeps them stable to begin with.
All right, so our first mechanism is a huge shift in our social architecture. And really, it all boils down to a pretty simple question. When you need guidance or you're looking for authority, where do you turn? This slide just lays it out so clearly. On the one hand, you've got traditional authority. It's rooted in things that are personal and local, your family, your community, the wisdom that comes from actual lived experience. But then look at the other side, modern authority. It's the big, impersonal state. It's the algorithm-driven internet. The source argues that we've essentially traded the wisdom of experience for the currency of popularity, which is a way more unstable way to figure out what's right or true. Now, to make this idea really concrete, the source zooms in on the family unit as a prime example. It suggests that the absence of a father figure can remove what it calls a key source of discipline and structure. From there, the analysis draws a pretty direct line to a child's ability to self-regulate, arguing it can have these huge knock-on effects for their entire life. And to ground this argument in data, the source gives us this quote directly. By claiming that fatherlessness is the strongest predictor, the analysis really tries to frame the breakdown of this traditional family structure as not just a social issue, but as a primary driver of some very specific and measurable consequences. Okay, so we've seen a shift in who we look to for authority. Now let's dig into how our own behavior is being shaped by a totally new force, what the source calls the public image machine. This mechanism is all about the really powerful incentives that drive our digital lives. The source breaks this down into this incredibly powerful feedback loop. It all starts with performing a public act of kindness. Right away, the algorithm grabs it and pushes it out there because it's emotionally charged content. Then you get rewarded with likes, shares, all that good stuff. But look at that final step, because this is the absolute core of the argument. The whole system actually discourages private virtue. It makes the performance of being a good person more valuable than actually being one. And this slide really visualizes the 2 competing value systems the source claims we're stuck between. On one side, you've got the public image. The goal is external validation, the metric is visibility, and, the source argues, this whole system rewards what it labels as narcissistic traits. On the other side is private character, driven by internal virtue and integrity, which it says rewards empathy. The crucial takeaway here is the source's belief that our modern platforms are basically designed, from the ground up, to favor the first one. So if our sources of authority have shifted and our incentives are now all about public performance, what in the world happens to our shared standards? Well, that brings us to the third mechanism, the erosion of those standards. This is really about what happens when morality stops being a community thing and becomes something we just outsource to big impersonal systems. For this argument, the source uses a very specific definition of materialism. It's not just about wanting to own nice things. No, it's a state where the hunt for wealth becomes the #1 goal, completely disconnected from any sense of ethics. The text argues that this mindset just rushes right in to fill the vacuum when those shared moral standards start to disappear.
And the source claims this erosion leads to some really severe consequences. So when communities aren't handling their own problems, dependency on the government just grows. When wealth is the only thing that matters, corruption becomes rampant. As that sense of duty to each other just fades away, social isolation goes up, and finally, you get economic instability. Because according to this analysis, no complex economy can actually survive without a basic foundation of trust.
Okay, our fourth and final mechanism takes a bit of a turn. We're shifting from the social to the physiological, though as we'll see, they are deeply connected. The source calls this a chemical collapse, and it focuses on the role that substance dependency plays in social instability. First, just to grasp the sheer scale of this, let's put a number on it. The source cites this absolutely staggering figure, over $700 billion. That's the estimated financial cost of substance abuse every single year in the United States alone. I mean, This is so much more than a personal health issue. It is a massive economic drain on the entire society. So, how exactly does this link to social instability? Well, this slide shows the direct physiological chain of events the text describes. Chronic substance abuse physically damages the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of our brain that handles things like planning and, crucially, telling right from wrong. This damage isn't a metaphor. It's actual neurological damage. And according to the source, this damage to the brain just ripples outward into society. When things like impulse control and empathy are chemically worn down, the text links this directly to higher rates of domestic violence and child neglect. It paints this really bleak picture of a society where the hard work of building a life is abandoned for the easy, short-term promise of chemical pleasure. So we've looked at 4 pretty distinct mechanisms: shifting authority, digital incentives, eroding standards, and chemical dependency. But maybe the most powerful argument the source makes is that these things don't happen in a vacuum. They feed each other. And that leaves us with this final, really important question. Is social stability like a single, solid pillar that can be broken? Or is it more like a fragile ecosystem, where the collapse of one little part can set off a chain reaction that brings the whole system crashing down? Based on everything we've seen, the source seems to be suggesting it's very much the latter.